results, but we didn't have enough definition, so we have collected additional groundwater data, which is shown on here from PTP 11 and PTP 12. And this one takes that same information and overlays the potentiometric surface for the the weathered Dawson. And so you can see that delineation there. And then the potentiometric surface. These hatched areas on the east and west side here, those are dry areas. So this is a part of what we're seeing as a trend, a real drying out of an absence of groundwater in this area. And then if you can read the contours, you can see that the extraction well that we're talking about, which is right here in the center, right there, if you can see my cursor, has generated a cone of depression, and it almost fully envelops this area, this molybdenum groundwater exceedance area. You can see that with the hash line here, but then also where it dips outside of that closed contour, you can see, well, you can assume everyone's aware of groundwater flow vectors. You can see that capture would be extended out to this area as well from this cone of depression. So that exceedance area is contained within the MW113 EW extraction well. And last figure. So this is just another blow up and showing the from the north boundary barrier wall down here in the south, and you can see the molybdenum exceedance area right down here, and this is up in the northern part of the map. This right up here is the Mississippi transect. So for scale, this is very far away from leaving Denver property, and given the capture of the extraction well is not likely to occur. And then just lastly, I want to bring up this last figure, and then I'll talk a little bit more about additional data that, where to go. Am I missing it? I not have it open. Maybe I need to open it up. There we go. Great. Can everyone see this chart?
Nope, it's not up there. It looks like you came out of screen sharing.
Oh, okay. Let me share screen. Sure. How's that?
Got it.
Great. So, and Bonnie had raised this earlier. We have been looking at the Molly 99 issue. A couple points on that. Molly 99 is something that is an isotope of molybdenum that is not naturally occurring. It is generated typically via reaction in a nuclear reactor to generate the isotope. But when Molly 99 decays, it ejects beta radiation. So this chart here shows our gross beta concentrations on water treatment plant influent. So this is a combination of all the influent into the plant, and it's we do that radiological sampling on the influent on an annual basis. And you can see the green dots are non-detect. The red dots are detections of gross beta radiation, which is also a point of clarification. There is naturally occurring radiation, but you can see up here at the very top, this is our permit level of 167 picocuries per liter. And you can see down here at the bottom, the last 5 years, gross beta has been all non-detect. So this is one line of evidence, and there's other that I think Dustin is going to touch upon from the RI data that shows that we have no gross beta concentrations that are detectable in our water treatment plant influent. So if there's, so at this point, I'll ask if there's any questions on the figures, and if not, I'll go into the additional data that we have collected and kind of where what we've got in the works.
You ever have the experience? Sorry.
I have a couple of questions. The first one from your exceedance area. What are you considering an exceedance? And what's the standard?
That's on the figure. So this is based on 200. I think the state standard's 210. I don't know why they just did it at 200.
Is that a standard for you to discharge? Is that a state drinking water standard? Or is that for your discharge to the POTW?
No, our discharge to the POTW was 167 picocuries per liter. And so I'm sorry. No, I don't have our discharge standard at my fingertips. I can get that to you. But as I recall, 210 is the regulation 41 standard.
Okay, and the next question on that figure is, it's my understanding you have pretty limited Molly data. So is there other areas of the site where you're collecting the data?
Yeah, Steve went over that last month, and he talked about levels in other extraction systems around the site. Again, Molly is not something that's in our compliance program,
Right.
but is something for our discharge, because we do have a discharge limit for that, that we do monitor. And it's not an issue in any of our other extraction points around the site.
Okay, but that's a pretty limited group.
And I think Steve talked about that last month.
Yeah, I think it would be very important to point out that there really isn't data on, I'm looking what we extracted out of the most recent version of the database. It's a very limited set of data that isn't really encompassing the boundary of the site itself or the near the end of your monitoring system, say to the north. It's pretty much the only area it's concentrated is where you have that exceedance you're discussing up there. Is there any plans to do something more comprehensive now that this issue has been noted?
I can go in and talk about what additional sampling, but our focus is this area because that's where we have where we found it, and that's based on review of additional areas around the site, extraction points.
Okay, and those extraction points are limited to what, MW38 and then a couple on-site locations?
So North Boundary Barrier Wall System, North Toe, MW38, and our perimeter systems on the east side.
Okay, so there could be.
And it also includes MW1, the GTEP well.
Okay,
which is over here.
but with the highest concentrations beyond your extraction system there, you don't have an idea of where if there's, it just does seem to me that the source area is rather unclear in your system, which could be both the physical monitoring, location of wells, and how they're configured, as well as just the lack of data. I mean, considering the size of the site, you've got a total of 162, I think, Molly data points, of which most of them are coming out of your extraction system, out of just a small handful of wells.
I'm sorry, I'm not following.
It just, I guess we can get into it later when you look at if you're going to expand the system or not. I just kind of question on whether, it seems to me you're jumping to a conclusion that this area is where the Molly problem is limited, not by the fact that we have other data points saying there's none there, but it doesn't seem like anybody's looked. You've got 3 or 4 points that you've looked, and it seems like making the assumption of the rest of the site may be a little premature.
Yeah, Steve talked about last month. We took a preliminary look at what the various sources are, and including some of the topics that some of the sources that Bonnie had raised. So we looked at, was it something within the water treatment plant? Was it something that was in an extraction system? Any of the extraction systems? Was it something that came from perhaps the well drilling fluids? So did they use a Molly lubricant when they were drilling the wells? These monitoring wells. Interviewed the driller. Looked at sources of waste. Was it coming from landfill and from landfill waste or from waste pits? And all that data, all of the information that we collected pointed to it was limited to this area, and that the source was likely a naturally occurring source, not coming from an extraction system from the site or waste, not coming from something within the water treatment plant itself or treatment process, not a part of the drilling of the wells.
So the data I have, the latest USGS report on naturally occurring Molly in the United States, the highest concentration they found was about 4,700 micrograms per liter. You're reporting 31,000, and this is something that you consider to be naturally occurring? I just find that a little
yeah, and we're
excessive.
We're part of what we're here to talk about today is that this is ongoing. We're continuing to collect information as to what the source is and how we can do that. And so that might be a good segue for me now to jump into that.
Well, yeah, let me finish with the second figure, and then I think that's a great idea to go ahead and go into that. As far as the role of the gross alpha, now the MCL for gross alpha is 15. I understand that you could release more than that for what's the next part for your treatment system, but the data that you showed with the detection limits around what would normally be, we would normally see much lower ones, but again, that's not really needed for that application. And that's
just one line of evidence, as Dustin will talk about. In the RI, they did Molly 99 testing and did not find it.
Well, I think that Molly 99 would be just one of the things that would be important to look for. I would not consider, considering where that came from and the possible volume and the concentrations you're finding, I'm not sure that all adds up anyway, but I'm not sure your high detection gross alpha provides any line of evidence in this argument, other than we probably would want to look for uranium or something like that that would be more closely associated with the process.
Yeah, this is just one line of evidence. So, as I talked about, there's the RI data, and then there's also, I don't know if you've looked it up yet, but the half-life for Moly 99 is 66 hours.
What's the uranium concentrations out there?
Uranium concentrations, I believe, are typical, naturally occurring. I think that's addressed in the radiological or radionuclide EPA fact sheet that was also attached to the figures and handouts that were distributed.
All right, I just think that might be more insightful. I'm not sure that the gross alpha is in a range that would give us data on this. And like you said, and I don't disagree, I'm not sure Moly 99 is the main issue. Considering that waste paint and lubricants, which were probably a much larger volume to consider at the site, are more likely major players. But go ahead, that does answer my question though.
Okay, great.
I've got a question. This is Richard. Can you hear
Hey,
me?
Richard.
Yeah, I
can hear you.
Oh, good. A couple questions. Number one, in 2013, it's 40 CFR was 192 as a standard, and then it was upped later on. When you have done these tests for the molybdenum, I believe you're using 210, and based on 210, if the minimum detection level is lower, you call that a non-detect, so you don't look? Is that a question? That's a question.
Richard, is your question, what is our detection limit for Moly
Yes,
in groundwater?
yes.
Single parts per billion. You can kind of see that from the J flags in this data.
So that detection level is much lower than 210, CFR 210?
Yep. And in fact, you can see up here, you got a 2J. And so J just meaning is a flag, laboratory analytical flag, indicating that it's between the MDL and the PQL. So, and so it's reporting between that range. So the detection limit, the MDL, which I don't have at my fingertips, has got to be lower than 2.
So on that well,
parts per billion.
Yeah, that well. So even though it was detected up there, are you going to take a look up there, or just say, well, it's non-detect, so we won't look?
No, I think it's important to, as Diedrich has already alluded to, molybdenum is naturally occurring. So you would expect some broad, low-level concentrations of molybdenum in groundwater, and that's typical with all metals.
Okay, and my second issue is in reference to Moly 99. Forget that. I'm looking at what was dumped out there in 20. Let's see. Hold on just a minute. In April of 2001, there was a testimony by Lloyd Hessler, a tanker driver for Milt Adams. That was Waste Transport Company. 2001. And he had testified that they had hauled 6 to 8 tanker loads per day of liquid waste from Shattuck Chemical to Lowry Landfill. So there's a lot more stuff out there than just this possible little amount of Moly 99. So when you're running tests on these wells, are you able to identify the what Moly is there?
What isotopes?
Yes, what isotopes are there?
No, we're just analyzing for analytical methods, not radiological, not isotopic.
So I guess not being a chemical engineer, I'm not too sharp on this, but the thing is the amount of waste that was produced by Shattuck and Syntex is enormous. And I guess there's records of that because they're responsible parties. But on that basis, could there not be molybdenum oxide out there, other things like that that are gone into the groundwater? And are you looking for those, or just the 99 isotope?
Richard, is your question, are we looking for isotopes of molybdenum?
My question is, are you looking to try and identify any of the waste liquids that came from Shattuck in reference to moly, whether it's an isotope or whether it's an oxide, but all of these wastes that came out there?
Yeah, and that was a part of the remedial investigation.
No, they didn't.
I can't find.
They didn't test for that.
They didn't test for anything like that. It just was like moly. So I don't know, maybe Dietrich can help me on this, but it seems like there's going to be a lot more waste out there than just what you're looking at right now. And that's not naturally occurring. What was taken out there from Shattuck and Syntex, all those thousands and thousands of gallons of waste,
Millions.
all right, millions, are not just normally occurring. So we're wondering around the site, what more is there? If you didn't test for it, you wouldn't know in the RI.
You know, I think that this is Dietrich, just to kind of to address that. I think that it's probably a next step could be or could include, I think a recommendation would be to look at isotopic analysis, and it would give you a little bit of an idea of source, but that would mainly come to a point if the site is releasing material that Shattuck handled. It had a variety of issues that are currently not part of the groundwater monitoring program. So I think that would be a logical next step after more of this is explored. But at this time, I'm a lot more concerned with determining what is a span and how much of this stuff is within the system. Can the system even define it the way it's designed? And as far as naturally occurring, I know that came up, and I did mention that, you know, of course, there is moly mining in Colorado as well as in Idaho, but those are, it's my understanding, are well outside this watershed. Looking at this data where we do have close to detection limit concentrations of moly, it does question whether or not there is any naturally occurring moly out there, because we're getting low concentrations as well. And right off the bat, it wouldn't be expected in this area. So,
yeah, well, I think Steve went over this last time, and we do see low-level moly concentrations in other extraction areas, just not to the levels of this area.
yeah, I guess really the question I have is when you had moly spike in, I think it was April of 2011, did you guys do any investigation then?
No, and I'm not sure what you're referring to.
The system showed I'm sorry, it's 2006, my correction. It showed up to about 160 coming into your system from, 50, it went up quite a bit then. And at that point, you guys were still injecting, so it would have been diluted in that location. That didn't cause any, that didn't raise any flags at all?
No, it did not.
Okay.
So
And this might be a later
I
part
know
of the,
I know we're kind of running out of time here. So, and I know there's others who have information to convey. So I do want to maybe depart and kind of talk about what we've got going in the way of collecting additional information. And I'm sure this conversation will continue. So a couple things I want to talk about. So we have, since Steve gave his briefing last time, we have conducted XRF and XRD analysis. So this is, for those who don't know, XRF, which stands for X-ray fluorescence, was conducted on several cores that we had maintained. In that XRF analysis identifies elements within the soil matrix, and so we had done, we've done 8 samples from cores within wells in this area, and 2 of those cores were from MW113 EW. The depths in the primary focus of those samples was looking at pyrite. So pyrite was a visible mineral identified in the core. So we focused our XRF sampling analysis on those where pyrite was visible. The depth in the 6 samples, 6 of the samples was at 24 to 34 feet. And then there was a deeper sample that was analyzed, and that was 64 to 94 feet. And that was in the MW113 EW well. In addition, a control sample was also analyzed where pyrite was not visibly seen. The result of that XRF analysis was it identified moly, the element moly in the MW113 EW well at 46 to 49 feet. It also identified sulfur that was present, and that's important because pyrite is iron and sulfur. Molybdenum can substitute in that pyrite mineral, so it can be a source. You can also have molybdenite, which is a moly sulfur compound. And so we did the XRF analysis, and we followed that up with what's called XRD. That's X-ray diffraction. So that XRD analysis identifies minerals, whereas the XRF identified elements. So we ran XRD on the sample where we had the moly hit, which is MW113 at 46 to 49 feet. And we did identify pyrite, which is not surprising since it was visible. The XRD analysis has a very high detection. It's looking at minerals that are in the percent weight range. So the detection limit is not great. But based on these results, we're working with a geochemist at CDM Smith. Based on the concentrations of moly in 113, that is very likely that the moly that's present there in that zone, even if a fraction of that molybdenum were to become into the dissolved phase, could account for the concentrations that we are seeing, even at levels of dilution. And that includes the the concentration in 113 WD that Diedrich, you cited of 31,000 ppb. What we're doing next to kind of follow up on that is to do chemical analysis of samples, including the samples I referred to in MW113 EW, using ICP mass spec. So that is, ICP is just a very sophisticated digestion of the sample so that it can then be analyzed via mass spec. That'll give us much lower detection limits and a much better quantification. And we're looking at the group of not just moly, but 23 metals in addition to moly, carbon, sulfur, and the geochemist will take that information along with pH and EH data, which is how acidic the water is and its oxidation reduction. Take a look at the phase, the solubility phase that the molybdenum and other metals like sulfur would present. And so we've collected those samples and submitted to the lab, and we're expecting them back in a week or so. That'll give us an indication, a better indication on whether the mineralogy could be that's present could be a source for the what we're seeing in the groundwater, essentially solubilizing those minerals. And so I'm sure we'll be reporting on that at the next CAG meeting.
A quick question. Since pyrite and other precipitants of ferric iron are often used to remove moly from water, are you going to be able to distinguish between naturally occurring pyrite, which is very common, that just wasn't exposed to contaminated groundwater and absorbed the moly? Is your system going to be able to discern that?
I am not familiar with mineralization from contaminated water, creation of pyrite. It's not something I'm familiar with.
No, I mean, just some of the things you're talking about are actual treatment systems for moly. So, I mean, not the system in place that you're looking at, but if you had contaminated water contaminated with moly, moving through that type of geology, it would absorb it. So if you're looking at it and trying to determine whether or not the moly was there first or simply absorbed from contaminated groundwater, that would be an important question from the analysis you described. And I'm not sure how you would discern the two. So the mineral would concentrate the moly that was found in the contaminated groundwater.
Sure. You know, I can follow up with the geochemist at CDM Smith regarding that.
You know, actually, University of Colorado Boulder did a lot of good research on that. I could probably find an article or two for you if you want.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Okay, in the interest of time, I'd like to, Dave, was that the end of your the points you wanted to bring up?
Yep.
Can we move along to Dustin McNeil? I'm sorry, was someone trying to say something?
Yeah, it was me. I toggled with, this is Janine, I toggled some of the settings there and it seems to be working for folks that it wasn't, that the chat function was not working for before. So I encourage people to go back and look into it again. That's all.
Thanks, Janine.
You bet.
Right. Okay, Dave, don't forget to stop sharing your screen. And Dustin, you can get ready to, are you sharing documents?
I mean, I have the letter, the email that I responded to Richard. I guess I could bring it up. That wouldn't hurt. Let's see. There. Is that showing up?
On my screen, it's a small little box off to the side, but that could be just my screen.
It's front and center for me.
Yeah, it looks
Okay.
good to me too.
Okay.
I can see it very well.
All right. Let's see. So, and this is really centric to the molybdenum 99 questions. In March and April, CDPHE received a series of emails specifically asking questions about molybdenum, and more specifically molybdenum 99 and its presence at the site. A number of the messages provided some supplemental information related to the Shattuck site in Denver, and referenced that molybdenum 99 had been detected or identified at the Lowry landfill site. So this response was to a series of those questions of molybdenum, but really specifically molybdenum 99. So I went through the Lowry, the 8 volumes of the RI, looking for molybdenum 99 information, data, detections, etc. I was unable to identify any detections of molybdenum 99. It looked like there were 24 waste pit liquid samples collected, all analyzed for molybdenum 99, and those were reported as non-detect. I did move on and also looked at the Microsoft Access database that's provided routinely with the site status reports every 6 months. So I looked at the database for the first half of 2019. That was the most recent available at that point in time. And I noticed there were 145 samples analyzed for molybdenum 99 at approximately 80 different locations between 1988 and 1991. And all of those were also non-detect for molybdenum 99. And also in the RI, Mo 99 was not identified as a site-related chemical. Reviewed the fact sheet that Lisa had provided, and it did provide some information about naturally occurring radionuclides that have been present at the site. They included uranium, thorium, tritium, and potassium. And some of the man-made radionuclides at the site included plutonium, americium, and strontium. And again, there was no indication of radioactive molybdenum being detected at the site. Moving down to Shattuck. Not only did I look at information available through our records center, but we also reached out to CDPHE staff who either have worked on Shattuck in the past, either currently work on it, and that type of institutional knowledge. The information that was provided back to me indicated that Shattuck really extracted and processed molybdenum metal, so metallic molybdenum. And there was no indication that molybdenum 99 or other forms of radioactive molybdenum were processed or handled at the Shattuck site. The source, as we've heard, is still being looked at. Data collection is ongoing. We've heard the working theory thus far that the observed molybdenum could be naturally occurring. Again, that needs to be verified. And then just some details about molybdenum 99 that I was unaware of until looking further into this. And it was mentioned earlier that the half-life is 66 hours, a little more than 2.5 days. Very short. So again, can never say never, but even if molybdenum 99 were to theoretically have been present during the operational period from 1965 to 80, would be unlikely to be still present in the environment as molybdenum-99. Let's see. I also had some questions provided. Let's see. Bonnie had sent some questions with the draft agenda. One of the first one was, is CDPHE convinced that the moly is naturally occurring? And if yes, could we please share the data that did convince us of that? At this point, CDPHE is not convinced of anything. As we heard, the data collection is still underway, and it's going to help support this investigation related to both the source and extent of the observed molybdenum that we've seen. Another question was if the state standard for moly is 210 parts per billion or micrograms per liter, is the state concerned about the levels of moly that Metro has reported? And the answer to that is yes, we are. And the last question was, does the state intend to enforce Regulation 41 for moly? And that is still being evaluated as far as how Reg 41 might apply depending on the source once that is identified. So that's all I had, but I certainly, if there's any questions.
I have a question and a
Yes.
comment.
Yes.
Justin, this is Bonnie. I want to thank you for the work you did. It's quite extensive and we appreciate it, and we appreciate your response. I think you've answered most of the questions on Moly 99. I would say that after all of your research, it's really good to hear that there's plans to move forward and see how the Regulation 41 does fit in with the investigation and everything. We've been discussing this issue, and we have two concerns that we'd like the state and EPA to keep in mind while all these investigations are going on. The first and most serious one for us is that these MW113 and the other 4 wells or 3 wells is right in the area where the state's white paper identified a growth fault. We've never had an agreement yet between EPA and the state on this white paper that was done, but the CAG is very concerned that this area here is where the growth fault is or could be, and we would like to keep that in mind, and we would like to have the state particularly keep that white paper in mind when you're working with EPA on this site. The second thing is that to the CAG, this MW113 is between the 4 wells, and we're concerned because to us this sounds like another MW38, another excursion that we didn't know about. And so we're really concerned about that. And I think you've gotten a couple of comments that, you know, we're concerned about how much of that moly has been going off-site in the plume. And so all of those issues, the CAG is going to try and keep on the highlighted whenever we discuss this issue. We think it's very important. And if the CDPHE white paper growth fault is anywhere near this, we think it's important that we figure this out, because we don't know where that growth fault might lead to, take anything that might be discharged into the growth fault. So I know I'm rambling here, but I'm just saying to you that we think that growth fault needs to be taken into deep consideration when there's this investigations going on. And it's our opinion that this moly issue is another MW38. And rather than just slowing down the pumping to try and make it low enough level to put through the water treatment plant. We'd really like the source determined for sure and where it's going determined for sure. But we want to thank you for your work on this Molly 99. At first, that was a big issue, but now I think we're all pretty comfortable with what you've written and your research. The only thing I would like to remind everybody is that Shattuck still has a plume under their site there, and there was radioactivity in the waste that they removed and tried to bury an above ground cell in downtown Denver. And the community in the area did not like having that waste in their neighborhood, and they fought and got it removed. So I'm just saying, with those kinds of information, you just never know, and we think we need to keep those things in mind when we're talking about whether it's radioactive or not. And I agree with you, the Molly 99 would be gone by now. What we need to be concerned with now is the Molly itself. So thank you for this letter, and thank you for clarifying that one sentence for me. It was a little confusing. And I think that's all. Did you have any questions on what I said, Dustin?
No, Bonnie, but I did write them down. And if I do have any additional questions, I will certainly reach out.
Okay, thank you, Dustin.
Thanks.
Okay, if everyone's okay with that, Dustin, was that, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. If you're ready
Yes.
to move
That-
on.
Yes, I'm ready to move on.
Okay,
Thanks, Lisa.
thank you very much. I believe we wanted to have Dave Barry just say a few words about the toxicity of, or the toxicology of molybdenum.
Okay. First thing is that what I'm going to, briefly cover, you can find in the IRIS assessment for molybdenum, which is published and online from the EPA IRIS program. And just as kind of a anecdote, one of the investigations that was used for helping determine the toxicity factor for molybdenum is a study that was conducted between some folks in Denver and some folks in Golden. And in Golden, apparently the groundwater there has naturally occurring molybdenum upwards of 200 micrograms per liter. And I guess the water down in Denver area is somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 to 5 micrograms per liter. So there was a study on those folks that contributed partially to the toxicity assessment of molybdenum. Molybdenum is an essential nutrient. It's a cofactor for several enzymes in the body, including things like xanthine oxidase and sulfite oxidase. The Food and Nutrition Board has established a recommended daily allowance of molybdenum of between 75 and 250 micrograms per day. Molybdenum is very kind of closely regulated in the body, and a little is not good, a medium point is good, and too much is not good. So it's one of these things that's a micronutrient and is fairly strictly regulated. Elevated molybdenum in the diet can result in elevated serum ceruloplasmin, which is a copper-containing enzyme, and it can also increase or lower uric acid in the plasma. High levels of molybdenum intake can increase copper and uric acid excretion, and long-term exposures to high levels of molybdenum lead to a mineral imbalance. And this imbalance, if it occurs in humans for a long time, can result in a condition called hypochromic microcystic anemia, which is basically lower levels of red blood cells, and the red blood cells are small. When both copper intake and molybdenum intake are limited in laboratory animals, results in decreased body weights over a growth period. And so the decreased body weight and the mineral imbalance in humans led to the development of a oral reference dose for molybdenum of 5 times 10 to the minus 3 milligrams per kilogram day. And molybdenum's not a carcinogen, is what we would classify as a threshold toxicant. So that's kind of an overview of molybdenum toxicity.
Okay. Do we have any questions on that? Okay. I believe our next.
One other thing that I would like to add here is that if you do go and look at the IRIS file for molybdenum, the date on the file, or the last time that this file was revised, was in November of 1992. So the toxicity value has been out there for quite a long time.
Hey, Lisa, we have a question from some of the CAG members that says, did I understand correctly from Dave Wilmoth that state would enforce Molly only if the source is determined to be anthropogenic?
I don't know whether that's a question for me or for Dave Wilmoth.
That would be Dave Wilmoth.
Yeah.
Or possibly Dustin or Colleen?
Yeah,
No,
this
she
is
asked for
Dave.
Dave.
I think, well, this is Dave. I think Dustin alluded to that.
Yes. And really, along those lines, if there is a naturally occurring, Reg 41 has some leeway for naturally occurring compounds or metals in particular, really. So without establishing anthropogenic versus naturally occurring, I guess the avenue of using Reg 41 isn't crystal clear.
Yeah, and I would add that the studies that are listed in the IRIS document, where they compare water from the Golden area and water from Denver area, it's clear that there are geologic differences there that contribute to the natural levels of molybdenum in the water.
And just I wanted to clarify, in case this brought up any question in the minds of folks, Dave's discussion of the toxicology of Molly does not mean that we're saying anyone is being exposed to it.
That's correct.
Okay, I know last but not least, we wanted to allow Tom Kraus. Oh, sorry.
Really? Yeah, let's not hurry away from this yet.
Sorry.
Sonia, would you like to discuss this a little further?
Yeah, so if it's determined to be a natural source, but it's in exceedance of the safety limits, what would be the response then in terms of containment? Would that be any different than the response that CDPHE or EPA would recommend if it were determined to be anthropogenic?
Sonia, is that question for me, or?
I think you're the best one to answer that one, Dustin.
As far as the containment goes, I would obviously, as we would need to see that that's still being captured and treated.
I'm sorry, somebody has some background noise, so. Okay, seems like.
It was Sonia, and I muted her. When she's ready to speak again, just unmute yourself. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
And as far as the, I guess, as Dave said, it is captured currently, as we understand it. But as far as the Reg 41, if it was determined to be naturally occurring at a level above the state standard, then Reg 41 has avenues that can be taken for alternate concentrations. So a concentration of greater than 210 could be allowable under Reg 41 if naturally occurring is determined to be the case.
But the water out there is not being used for a potable source at this time. So is 41 still ARAR?
And ARAR.
I'll have to look back at the, I'll have to get back to you on that.
Okay, do we have any more questions?
None from here.
I have one more question, please.
Sure.
What was that, Dr. Berry, that just said that nobody's drinking the water? So would that Reg 41 rule fit? Was that Dr. Berry?
Yes.
That's correct.
Okay. I think the CAG would prefer that we not base our information on whether people are drinking the water or not, because there haven't been any studies to determine what's happening north of the site. And we haven't tested Gun Club Estates well water yet. And it's a sore point with the citizens when people say, well, nobody's drinking the water. So is it really important? So just as a matter of courtesy, we'd like to try not to use that as our measuring stick until we have more information available, if we could, please.
So this is Linda Kiefer. I just wanted to check and see if Bruce Peterman had anything to add to the discussion on Molly. I know he did some research for us on that. I don't know if he's still on the call or not.
Yeah, I'm here, Linda.
Hi, Bruce.
Everybody hear me? How you doing?
Good.
I guess just a few little things, and they're generalized, and they also depend on the. And I'm sorry, my camera's not working. Otherwise, I'd be no problem. You guys could see me waving my hands. But anyhow, there's a lot going on here in this extraction area, and I guess it's just from a high level look at this information is that first off, there's the water injection has stopped, and that's very apparent when you look at some of the drops in water levels in the extraction wells themselves, and in the areas around that area north of the north boundary barrier wall. And intrinsically, this would be a good, at a higher level, a good view of we are going to be changing or seeing changes in geochemistry out there due to areas that have dewatered, that have been in saturation for years, and are not longer saturated. And there might be a lag time between something that's saturated and now changing its oxidation state and moving things around differently, both in the metals form and in the organic form. So I think it's important to keep that in mind, that this is a process that's started in October, I don't know, 2018, I believe. and we're just starting to see some of these effects. So I think the pathway to look at whether this is naturally occurring molybdenum or a waste product of molybdenum is the things to do are the right things to look at. Look at the cores, look at the groundwater, look at the geochemistry, and those three things have to be there in order for this to make some sense in the data interpretation that's coming out of it. Also, the radioactive molybdenum constituents. Excuse me. That's not me barking, by the way. So, if you look at the SSR information that was pulled out of there, there's the molybdenum 99 data that's can be extracted from that database, and there's all the molybdenum data that's on that has been collected on the site. Yes, some of it's old, but that's going to give a fairly interesting picture. But there's not anything graphical we got laid out on that yet. That's something that also could be looked at as far as distribution. So I think that's some of the obvious steps that could be taken to move forward on the molybdenum front. I don't know what's bouncing in here on the interference, but I'm getting a lot of interference here. I guess that's about it. We looked at one thing that was maybe a small item for anybody that's interested, because molybdenum 99 is used as a medical nuclear isotope along with technetium. It's I found just out of curiosity, it's actually fairly expensive. That doesn't mean that we can't measure in the radioactive world, measure way down to very, very, very small parts as far as an isotope is concerned. But just to put it in context, 1 gram of molybdenum 99 is about $25 to $50 million worth of molybdenum 99. So it's not something that's, and that treats in the nuclear medicine world, from what I've been reading, it treats about 1 million doses in its use. If you were to produce that much at a time, you can't. Anyway, it's interesting sidebar, and it was a rat hole I ran down, rabbit hole, I guess, because that nuclear stuff is pretty interesting. But anyhow, the molybdenum stuff is going to be a little bit of a challenge here, I see, for because it is it's a different kind of metal, and it's going to be its oxidation states and dissolving in a different natural isotopes. Looking at, I think it'll be a challenge to see what's actually going on here. That's all I got.
Hey, Bruce, this
Yes.
is Bonnie. I wonder if you could please, there's a lot of people on right now that have never met you and don't know who you're with.
Mm-hmm.
And number one, I want to thank you for coming, because we always appreciate your presentation. And so if you could let people know who you are and what your responsibilities are, I'd appreciate it, so people that are new to this will be able to hear who Bruce Peterman is.
Okay, sure. We'll do. My name is Bruce. I work with Pacific Western Technologies. I also work a lot with Diane McMillan. We're kind of a team together on that do technical support to EPA. And it's oversight report, and we also do a lot of the technical reviews and data evaluations for any product that's coming out of the Lowry landfill. And we're also involved with technical discussions with the WSDs, EPA, CDPHE, and we just try to keep our focus on the grounding ourselves on these technical items that come up, and then try to contribute that way.
Thank you, Bruce. And Linda, I do hope that Bruce can participate in more of these meetings. He's always a valuable addition, and so we're glad he's here tonight.
We are too. We're glad to have Bruce as part of our team.
So Lisa, we do have someone on the CAG that would like me to read a statement they really want in the recording. It is that it is very likely cattle are drinking the water when they are grazed on the property north of Yale. This person has seen, hold on, I found them earlier. Since cattle consume about 3 times as much water as dry feed, drinking water containing 1/3 the toxic level of feed could prove toxic. It's important to this person.
Okay, thank you. Dave, did you want to respond to that at all? Or?
At this time, I don't have my eco data set up, but I can look into that and get back to you as far as what the level might be for causing adverse or potentially adverse outcomes in cattle drinking the water.
Okay, thanks.
If I could make a quick request. We've touched this on a couple times about how much data there is on Molly for the site. And I'm looking at total concentrations, and I don't expect to see isotopic specific. But the data set that I pulled from the database was very small. Who would be the best person to pull that information and provide it to us so we make sure we're all looking at the same data set? I'm happy to provide the Excel sheet I'm using.
Sure, I've got one here, Dietrich, that I'm looking at that we actually pulled it 2 different, same data source, but 2 different extractions. So I could pull those, what I'm looking at, and send it to you, and it's right out of the most recent SSR report.
Okay.
Was that one. And then, yes, but all the, like the Molly 99 stuff, everything I'm looking at there is all 88, 89, and 90, 91.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other stuff, which is, yeah, it's about 180, 84 records for the other stuff, for the different wells in different locations. And so my next curious thing would be to put all these numbers together and stick them on a page, and we can do that fairly quickly. I know WSDs could do it too, but we've got all the XY coordinates, these things, and where these, I know there's waste pits and things mapped in there, but make a better visual.
Is it okay if I just respond to the meeting announcement with the spreadsheet that I'm using? Is that appropriate?
That'd be fine with me.
You can do that. You just can't get the people that are blind copied.
Can I send it to you and have you distribute it?
I could do that, yes.
Sure.
Tom Kraus would very much like to weigh in on this topic.
Go ahead, Tom. Wait, you need to unmute your mic.
There you go. Thank you, Janine. I had sent out a paper with some questions and some data on it, and I'd like to go over some of that. One is that on question 1, I think it's been established already, and I appreciate, Dave, that you did that, that the molybdenum has been found at the site's northern point of compliance boundary. It's also been found south of it, so that it's within the boundary of the compliance boundary of the Superfund site, and it's also been found outside of it, north of it. So that it is important to make sure that it doesn't travel further. The second point is the Molly does concentration greatly exceeds the state groundwater standard of 210 micrograms per liter. It's 148 times Colorado groundwater standards. So then if it's that high, why is it that high? Where is it coming from? You can't just take a bottle of salt and molybdenum and drop it in there and say it's coming from that. Or that it's extracted from the pyrite that's there. There's no way that can be. And if somebody has any contradiction to that statement, I'd certainly be glad to hear it. And then the point is that if we're testing molybdenum, that's the third point, it's dissolved in water. Well, it's a stone, basically. It's a metal. And you can pour all the water you want to, plain water, on it, and it's not going to dissolve in it. So from the reference that I gave you, I looked at it and it says the only way it's going to dissolve is if the water is very acid and or it also has a very low oxygenation. So that, I think that's one of the other questions we ought to be trying to follow or answer. Where's that water coming from? And that may help lead us to where the source is. And that's not, that's not a natural thing. When I looked at the USGS, the high concentrations of moly in Colorado are not out on the plains. On the plains, they're only between, I think it's 0.13 to 0.49 micrograms per liter is what's usually found. You have to go to the Henderson molybdenum mine or the Climax molybdenum mine, or have to go to Idaho Springs to find concentrations like that. Yeah, in that one well, we've found a concentration that's 31,000 micrograms per liter. That's basically 31 milligrams. That's way above toxic limits for human use. So it means that it really is important that it's contained and treated if necessary. From that, it follows I'm concerned about the fact that they've reduced the pumping from 3 gallons a minute to 1 gallon per minute. That's reducing it by 2/3. So now, does that mean that area that it's in, is that going to grow? Wouldn't it be better to continue to pump it, try to treat it appropriately, whether it is to change the pH or the oxidation of it, so that you can then have it precipitate out and then be safe, the water safely be transmitted someplace else. And the last point I have is that if we're really gonna follow and evaluate 1,4-dioxane as well as molybdenum, wouldn't it be appropriate for it to be placed on the analyte list of 30 compliance monitoring quality analytes that need to be followed? And when you do that, then you've got to start reporting it down to the MDL and the PQL so that we get a good picture of where it might be coming from. And you also then assure that you look all throughout the site to make sure that there isn't a source of where that's coming from. And you're talking, all the maps you've given us for flow are two-dimensional. None of your flow maps have shown anything about whether or not this may be coming up from below. The lignite layer, which is the bottom of the site, is 200 feet below the groundwater level at that point. And this is your MW113 WD 1 that where you first found the Molly is one of the deepest wells that you have, I think. And it's in the trough of where the water seems to be going, groundwater seems to be flowing from south to north outside of the site, beyond the north boundary barrier wall. So I'd also like to ask that you test to see whether or not it's coming up from below. If it's coming up from below, where's it coming from? Again, it may be, and the obvious thing is it might be coming from something that's south of it, because that's the direction of the water flow from south to north, and south of it is a Superfund site. So anyway, I've given references as to why I asked those questions. Some of those questions were actually answered before at this meeting by new data you've given us. I appreciate the new data. I would, as I understand, EPA would have to do some kind of memo in order to allow for both molybdenum and 1,4-dioxane to go on that list. And I'd like an answer from the EPA as to why or why not they don't think that these things should be on that list. Thank you.
This is Dave Wilmot. Hey, thanks, Tom, for that. And one of your suggestions, which I failed to mention, is part of what we're doing. We are sampling MW113 LD, which is slightly below the UD well, in order to better define the vertical extent. And we should have that result next CAG meeting.
Okay, and Tom, I apologize. Did you want the figures that you had emailed to us, the maps at this point? I think those, you just made your discussion perhaps, and we didn't have some maps up on the screen that you had wanted.
First two maps show where the north boundary, or the area boundary is for the Lowry Landfill Superfund site. And if you would show that show the blue line, that goes right through where the, right through where the well is, MW131, that we've been talking about.
Okay, Janine's got it up on the screen, I think. Is that right?
Yeah, can you scroll it so that the top of it comes into view, the north end comes into view to show where the blue line of the boundary is? Can you scroll it down a little? There. So I've outlined or highlighted the two wells in yellow, GW109 and B326WD, and between those is the initial MW131 or 113 that was where they found the site. And you can see those red dots are actually 1,4-dioxane levels that are more than 10 times of the standard. And so you're finding at that point, not only is moly coming down, but also is 1,4-dioxane. So that's a particularly important area. And that's, I think, why Bonnie brought up a question as to whether or not there's a ground fault under there that might be directing the flow of water from south to north. And if it is, that would give us an idea of where we could look, if we could find that ground fault, where we could look to see where the source might be coming from. Go on to the next one, if you would.
Hold on, getting there.
Okay.
This one. This one.
While Janine is pulling that up, I just want to say that I think we're going to have to table our last discussion item, which was about dad's wells, and push that to the next CAG meeting if we can. I know we already have a lot to cover in that one. So we'll have to see how that goes. But we're definitely running out of time for this one.
So this is Linda Kiefer. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
So I wanted to address something that Tom said. So in terms of adding 1,4-dioxane to the 29 it's actually 29 chemicals that we monitor for. 1,4-dioxane is actually on that list, and it is a chemical. With the molybdenum, so there's a lot of procedure and identification as a contaminant concern that we go through the Superfund process for. Molybdenum hasn't gone through that process, so right now we're monitoring based on the information we get. I'm not saying that wouldn't happen in the future, but for now, I think the measures that we're doing as far as the monitoring, the tests that are being run, the eyes that are on this, that will continue to happen. The actual continuation of the weekly sampling of the molybdenum is in the tech memo on the cessation future monitoring or current monitoring that will happen. CDPHE is reviewing that. So EPA believes that what we're looking at right now is sufficient. If we need to do more measures at a different time, we will consider that.
Thank you. Would you please send me a copy of that list? Because my copy of the list doesn't show it on there for 1,4-dioxane.
Oh, sure. It's in the 2018 groundwater monitoring plan. It's table 4. But yeah, I will certainly send you a copy of that list. Okay. It used to be 30. I believe nitrate came off because there's just too much background interference from prior applications of sewage in the area. But anyway, it is 29 now, but 1,4 is on there. I will send that out.
And Jennifer, let's just forget all the other figures that I had. This is just, the other figures did show that basically all along the plains of Colorado, the average level of molybdenum in groundwater is no greater than 40 micrograms per liter. And that only something which I already alluded to, only in the mountains at the mine sites and in Idaho Springs is it much, much higher than that. So when we come up with 31,000 micrograms per liter, that's totally unprecedented for anything that's been found in this area. And so I think it's really just that thing alone is a reason that we need to figure out where it's coming from. Thank you.
Okay, that brings us right up to the hour, and I apologize we ran out of time, but we did have some good discussion there. So I think like I said, we'll need to table the dad's discussion for the next CAG meeting, perhaps, and as far as the other topic for the next CAG meeting, it was the North End investigation report, I believe. Linda, did you want to say anything else about that?
No, it's contingent on us, our discussions with CDPHE, but we're working toward making that happen. And then for June, we're looking at the conceptual site model, rolling that out.
Okay.
I have one follow-up point that I wanted to make. Sarah had to jump off, or we lost her or whatever, and then she came back. And in the early part of the discussion this evening, there was a question that, Linda, you had decided you would defer to Sarah because of her expertise. I think it might have been you, Bonnie, that was asking a question that didn't get answered. Can you guys remember that?
It was Dietrich.
Might have been Dietrich.
What is a times zero? Was one of them. How many data points will there need to be for there to be a trend? And then how fast is the molybdenum in water moving?
Yes.
They're the three questions I had.
Does that sound right, Dietrich?
Yeah, I was mainly interested in when they're going to do the restart on that and for the statistics.
Okay, excellent. I just want to make sure that we follow up on that.
Yeah.
I was really chasing my tail here on all the things going on, and I would not have been able to capture that accurately for her. And so I told her that, and then that I would come back to it and make sure we get it on the record, what needed to be followed up.
Verify that my question was not how many data points need to be collected. You could collect all those data points within a month period of time. I was asking how many days or how many months or years do you have to collect data over before you get an average of what's happening over that period of time, so then you can analyze it. So it was time, not number of data points.
Right. And since they're sampling the Molly weekly, that time frame would be shorter than if we sample it quarterly.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, if everyone is okay with that discussion and we can bring the meeting to a close. Bonnie, are you okay with that?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. It's been a really good discussion, and I thank everyone for their participation. And again, it was great to have you here tonight to add to the discussion, Bruce. And Tom, good job. And so thank you all for your hard work helping put this together. And I'll be sending out, I did receive the Metro Metro, now I can't think of the name of them, the results, and I'll be sending that out to everybody. I just received them just yesterday, and I didn't want to overload you with all of the information I've been sending out. I will send out the Metro monitoring results tomorrow. I want to tell you all, I'm very happy to see you healthy, and please take care of yourselves. And this has been a really good discussion.
Agreed. Thank you,
Thanks, everybody.
for participating in the Zoom platform as well. We really appreciate that.
Be well.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Safe and
everyone.
be well.
Yeah.
Good night.
Night. Good night.
All right.